In my previous video, I celebrated what I consider to be the best change that Bloober made in its remake of Silent Hill 2. It was something that not only works very well on its own right in the new game, but it also changed my understanding of the original game and has me rethinking some of my own long-standing opinions that I had about James's character. But not all of Bloober's creative liberties were for the better. In fact, I actually dislike most of Bloober's other creative changes. There was one change in particular that I hated so much that I almost stopped playing the game, and it's not something that I see a lot of people criticizing, so I wanted to take a few minutes to express my frustrations. No, it is not the bloated length of the game, at least not specifically, nor is it the meandering pace of the individual levels, or dungeons as some people are calling them, which is a fitting term considering how over-designed many of them are, nor is it the greater emphasis on action or those obnoxiously pervasive mannequin ambushes. All of those things are close runners-up, and some of them are closely linked to the topic of this video. Put simply, Bloober's game fell victim to one of the key flaws that all of us skeptics expected it to. It lacks the subtlety and the restraint of the original Silent Hill 2 developed by Konami's internal team Silent. The greater reliance on action mechanics, its bloated length, its overlong dungeons, and its constant reuse of gameplay gimmicks like mannequin ambushes, climbing, crawling, and breaking down walls with your melee weapon are all artifacts of Bloober's more ostentatious approach to the source material. In my opinion, this lack of restraint from Bloober is most apparent in its design of the Otherworld. The god-awful Otherworld of Silent Hill 2 Remake almost single-handedly ruins the entire game for me. A few years ago, I had made a video about the Lakeview Hotel in the original Silent Hill 2 and how it casts the nature of the game's Otherworld into doubt. That video explores the nature of Silent Hill 2's Otherworld in more detail, and I highly recommend that you watch it either before finishing this video or after. And, the Lakeview Hotel is at the end of the game, so obviously any discussion of it, either in the original game or the remake, is going to necessarily involve spoilers for both games. If you're concerned about spoilers, you should probably stop now, because the entire rest of this video is going to contain story and gameplay spoilers for both versions of Silent Hill 2, as well as some thematic and visual spoilers for Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 3, and maybe also some other games. Proceed at your own risk. When James first arrives at the pier of the Lakeview Hotel, he comments how it hasn't changed at all since he and Mary had visited 3 years ago. Upon going inside, he finds the building abandoned, but otherwise in a pristine condition. Far more pristine than any of the other environments that he's been into so far, and a far cry from the rusted and dilapidated state of all the other areas he has explored since arriving in town. Upon reaching room 312, watching the videotape, and confronting the harsh reality of Mary's fate, James finds the hotel changed. It is dirty, waterlogged, and falling apart. As he goes deeper and deeper, parts of it appear to be burned down as if the hotel had been on fire. Most early walkthroughs and strategy guides for the game referred to the damaged version of the hotel as the Otherworld, but I've argued in the past that this isn't the Otherworld at all. I've argued that the burnt down and waterlogged versions of the hotel is actually its true appearance, and that the pristine version that we find upon first arriving is actually the Otherworld. It is a version of the hotel that is manifested by James's memory and his subconscious, a version of the hotel that his deluded mind wants to find, a version of the hotel in which Mary is alive and waiting for him. After watching the videotape, his delusion comes crashing down and he is forced to confront reality, that the hotel is destroyed and his wife is dead. The biggest clue for this is the fact that in the prison, we can find a drawing of a building on fire. The building is not identified, but the boat dock is unmistakable. This building is the Lakeview Hotel. The implication is that the building burned down in a real-life fire, sometime between James and Mary visiting and the events of the game. Perhaps the prisoner in this cell was the arsonist, or perhaps, as I theorized in my older video, Angela was the arsonist, although the remake makes some changes to the hotel that make that far less likely. They removed all of the abstract daddies, which was one of the key points that I use to argue that Angela could have potentially been the arsonist. In fact, Masahiro Ito himself has recently corroborated the idea that the pristine hotel is the Otherworld on his social media accounts. But for 20 years, fans and game journalists have mistakenly referred to the damaged version of Lakeview as the Otherworld Hotel. This illustrates just how subtle and psychological Team Silent's depiction of the Otherworld is in Silent Hill 2. The fact that we can mistake any area of Silent Hill for its Otherworld counterpart and vice versa opens up the possibility that we might be mistaking all of the Otherworlds. Case in point, is the Blue Creek apartment in the original game an Otherworld? Or is it just another apartment building next door to the Woodside apartments? In the original game, the answer to this question isn't entirely clear. James crawls through a fire escape from the Woodside apartments into an adjacent building, so it is clearly another building. But is it also the Otherworld? Or is it just an abandoned and condemned apartment? The fact that we can't tell is part of what makes the environments of Silent Hill 2 so uncanny. The Otherworld isn't as clearly delineated as it is in the other original games. Pockets of each character's Otherworld seems to blend in and out of the environments, and sometimes they overlap in a variety of ways. And it isn't just the hotel and apartments either. The nighttime version of Silent Hill in the original game is also often called the Otherworld streets. But it could also just be the normal streets, shrouded in the dark of night. We enter a tunnel with a graded walkway, but this could be a temporary construction covering up a hole in the ground, the same holes that we observe in Silent Hill 1, and which also exist in Silent Hill 2, and which are usually blocked off, or fenced off, or covered in scaffolding. This could just be grading and scaffolding that was put up as part of a repair effort, or to allow access to homes and businesses. It does not have to be an Otherworld like the rusted metal grading walkways that we saw in the first Silent Hill. Even the hospital, which has a much more clear Otherworld in that we have to explore it twice, does not look as otherworldly as you might expect it to. Just like with the Blue Creek apartments, the hospital could just be an abandoned and condemned hospital, perhaps undergoing extensive repairs or renovations. Compared to rusted hellscapes that is the Alchemilla Hospital in the first Silent Hill, Brookhaven just looks like it's been covered in tarps and blankets, which is a common thing to do in an old condemned building in order to prevent stuff from getting dusty. We revisit Brookhaven Hospital again in Silent Hill 3 and see what a truly otherworldly version of this place could look like. And what we see in Silent Hill 2 is almost mundane in comparison. The prison is similarly uncanny. Is the prison an otherworld, or is it just what the prison actually looks like? Is there even a prison at all? I don't know. Do you? Perhaps the only clear-cut, surefire otherworld in all of Silent Hill 2, at least the original game, is the Labyrinth. Is the Labyrinth a real place? I mean, probably not, but who knows? Every other location in Silent Hill 2 just looks normal enough that it could be Otherworld, or it could just be abandoned and condemned. They all look convincing enough to be a real place, but are all just a little bit off. That's what makes them uncanny. Even in a replay of the game with full understanding of the game's twist ending, the player is constantly wondering whether what you are seeing is actually real, and it all reflects James's mental state at the time. That is a big part of the original game's tone, and it's something that makes the original game so unsettling and so replayable. That uncanny quality from the original game is almost entirely absent from the remake, at least with regard to the Otherworld. And it is, in my opinion, one of, if not the, saddest casualties of the remake. The Otherworld locations are clearly presented as Otherworld in the remake, with no possibility of confusing them for real places. The Otherworld environments in the remake have that metallic, rusted, and industrial quality more akin to the first and third games. This extends to the more ambiguous Otherworld locations from the original game, such as the Blue Creek apartments and the nighttime streets of Silent Hill. These environments might be appropriate if Bloober had been remaking the first or third Silent Hill games, but they are completely inappropriate for a remake of the second game. Heck, Sometimes these Otherworld environments have environmental details that would still feel out of place or silly even in the first or third games. For example, the Otherworld hospital in the remake has toilets that are perpetually overflowing with literal shit. It's as if Bloober remembered that one optional scene in the original game in which James sticks his hand down a clogged toilet, and they decided to make overflowing clogged toilets into a recurring motif for the entire hospital Otherworld, even though the hand in the toilet bit was actually in the apartment and not in the hospital. Even in Silent Hill 3, which derives a lot of its horror and otherworldly aesthetic from bodily functions, the image of toilets perpetually overflowing with shit would have been a bit much.
Oh, forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
Stuff like this just feels like a sophomoric attempt to disgust the player simply for the sake of disgust. It's almost as bad as Silent Hill Homecoming, opening with a scene that feels like it was pulled straight out of the movie Hostel. It's gross for the sake of being gross. The original game rarely, if ever, includes things simply for the purposes of grossing out the player. And the one time that James does stick his hand down a clogged toilet, which is disgusting, it's not done for shock value. It's done in order to characterize James. James sticks his hand down this toilet for the same reason that he sticks his hand in slimy holes, which is something that the remake also repeats multiple times, and for the same reason that he is willing to jump into bottomless pits. It shows how single-minded he is in his desire to find Mary and the truth, while also emphasizing just how cognitively disassociated he is with the entire situation.
Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
This is not subtle, it is not uncanny, and this does not reflect James's mental state in any way. This is, in a nutshell, everything that critics and skeptics were afraid of when Bloober was announced as the developer of this remake. And here it is, in the final product, completely validating those fears, even though, yes, the game overall still turned out to be pretty good. Bloober's depiction of the Otherworld in this remake seems to represent a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Otherworld is and how it works, especially in Silent Hill 2, as a reflection of James's subconscious. And it's so weird that they misfired so hard here, because they do seem to perfectly understand so much else of the original game and what made it tick. They even managed to provide their own insight into the original game that elevates the source material, in some cases, as I discussed in the previous video. How did they get that so right, but then get this so wrong? I don't know, maybe this Otherworld aesthetic wasn't Bloober's idea at all. Maybe it was some commandment sent down from Konami's corporate brass in order to maintain some kind of product branding or something like that. But as much as I would like to blame Konami for fucking all of this up, even that doesn't make sense, because Silent Hill F doesn't seem to be forcing this particular aesthetic on itself. But then again, that game isn't out yet, so who knows what it will end up looking like. Now, I will concede that Bloober's remake does make an effort to frame itself as some kind of sequel, in which James is trapped in a limbo-like time loop. In fact, James being stuck in a time loop was a fringe fan theory for the original game too, and for some of the exact same reasons. In this context, some of the creative liberties that Bloober made with the remake, such as the changes to the Otherworld, can arguably be justified, because this is arguably a different Otherworld than the original. If you want to argue that, then fine, I'm not going to fight you over it. That's Bloober's prerogative. I still think that it leads to a lesser game regardless. And all of this is to say nothing of the bloated nature of these Otherworld dungeons. There are no locked doors that can never be opened, as was the case in the original. Aside from a large chunk of Blue Creek's first floor, Blue Creek being by far the best Otherworld location in the remake, The remake forces the player to have to traverse pretty much every room and every nook and cranny of every level. Absolutely nothing is left mysterious or up to the player's imagination. If a door is locked, you will either find a key, or you'll smash, crawl, or climb your way into that room or hallway. The game repeats these tricks over and over and over again. This game is so combat-oriented that it makes you fight literally everything. You have to fight the mannequins, you have to fight nurses, you have to fight mini-bosses, you have to fight glass windows, you have to fight the fucking walls in this game. And yes, you have to attack the walls. You have to. These breakable walls and crawl spaces don't hide secrets or optional supplies or bonus collectibles or side quests. In most cases, they block necessary paths of progress on the main campaign, and they are everywhere. Yes, I get that Bloober may have felt it necessary to show the player that it is possible to use a melee weapon to smash down a wall. That way, when you fall into that well in the labyrinth, it won't seem like such a stretch to try attacking the walls. I confess that that could be considered a design flaw of the original game. One could argue that there is no way that the game should expect the player to figure out that you can smash the wall with the plank or pipe. One could also argue that it is part of what makes this little set piece so terrifying. It is very deliberately trying to instill a sense of panic in the player. Are you trapped? Did you accidentally soft lock yourself? Were you supposed to go somewhere else first? How do you get out? Having obtuse mechanics or breaking your own established rules is something that is generally frowned upon in video games. But horror games are one genre that can actually get away with breaking rules and conventions in certain circumstances because it does create very real feelings of panic and paranoia for the player. And this sequence of falling down this well in the original Silent Hill 2 is a perfect example. It forces the player to have to question the game's own rules and mechanics, at the same time that you are questioning James' sanity and the sanity of the other characters around him. It's also, very importantly, something that happens exactly once in the original Silent Hill 2. It is not repeated ad nauseum in the original game. But yet, the remake has us smashing walls with the plank and pipe dozens of times before reaching this analogous set piece. So that when you fall into this well, there is no fear of actually being trapped. There is no panic. You know there's a wall that can be smashed, even if you didn't play the original game. Heck, I actually feel like Bloober should have subverted expectations here and not allowed the player to smash the wall. Add some other way to get out of this trap. That would have subverted the expectations of both remake players and also people who played the original game. Other game developers know how to use restraint and mechanics like this. Specific minor gameplay spoilers incoming for Dead Space, The Last of Us Part 2, and God of War. Skip to the timecode on screen if you don't want to see these spoilers. So, for example, in the original Dead Space, there is a jump scare in which a necromorph ambushes the player immediately after you exit out of a workbench, or maybe it was a save point, I forget which. It's one or the other, maybe it was both. But it only happens like once in the entire game. This same jump scare is also executed in The Last of Us Part 2, except that the ambush actually happens while using the workbench. The Last of Us Part 2 also totally foreshadows and sets up this ambush with environmental details that will seem obvious to the player in retrospect. Another example is this booby-trapped chest in God of War. I only ever encountered one of these chests in my playthrough. It would not surprise me if there were a few more hidden around that I just never found. In fact, I would actually be surprised if this was, in fact, the only booby-trapped chest in the game. But the point is that these booby-trapped chests are rare, so that when you find one, it's a genuine surprise. Even if you have seen them before, there is such a long time between them that you likely have forgotten that being booby-trapped is a thing that can happen. And, of course, there's plenty of mimics in other games. But what makes those three examples of Dead Space, The Last of Us Part 2, and God of War relevant and important in this discussion is that in each of those games, the ambush only happens once. These game designers have enough sense and restraint to know that the simple threat of these ambushes or booby traps is enough to keep the player on edge for the rest of the game. They don't have to repeatedly spam these ambushes every few minutes to make the player get the point. Bloober lacks this sense of self-restraint, and it's one of the reasons why many of Bloober's critics argue that they fundamentally do not understand horror in the gaming medium. This is exactly what pre-release critics were afraid of, and those critics were 100% correct. The Otherworld dungeons in particular are also exceedingly padded in and of themselves. Puzzles that were originally a relatively simple process of deciphering a single riddle and or finding a single key item or maybe two now require finding multiple items scattered across the level. Every single dungeon in the remake seems like it has to have its own variation of the locked box with a hair in it puzzle, and each key item has to have its own little puzzle or locks to solve. It's so bloated and over-designed that the playtime of the remake can easily be triple or quadruple that of the original game. What was a concise, streamlined experience that could be enjoyed in its entirety, including all of the story cutscenes, in an afternoon or a weekend now takes days or weeks to slog through. I've replayed the original Silent Hill 2 probably half a dozen times over the years, maybe more, and probably will replay it more in the future. But every time I even consider booting up the remake again, I think about how long and dragged out parts of it are. I'm looking at you, Otherworld, and I just don't have the time or energy for that. I've got other games to play, blogs to write, YouTube videos to edit, board games to play, and oh yeah, a full-time job and a family who I love and want to spend time with. I know that the remake can be completed in well under 10 hours because there's trophies that say so, but this is an atmospheric, story-driven horror game. I do not want to feel pressured to have to rush through the game or to skip cutscenes. If I'm going to play it again, I want to be able to immerse myself in that atmosphere and take in the game's environments and mood so that I can notice details that I missed in my first playthrough. I could do that with the original perfectly comfortably in 6 to 8 hours. The remake taking 16 plus hours is just too damn long. I could play through the first 3 original Silent Hill games in the time it will take to play through Remake again. It's a damn shame that Konami hasn't made the original Silent Hill 2 available on digital storefronts. All we have is the subpar HD collection version with all of its glitches, missing textures, and shitty fog effects. And even then, only the PlayStation version is even worth playing since the Xbox version never even got the patches to fix some of the launch problems. Did the Xbox version ever get the original voice cast back? I don't think they got that either. The Silent Hill 2 remake is far from the definitive version of this game, and if it's the only version that is going to survive in perpetuity, then that's a tremendous loss for video gaming as an art form. The remake is fine, it's good. It sure as hell could have turned out a lot worse. But the remake lacks so many of the unique design elements and quirks that gave the original game its distinct personality and which made it so beloved to begin with. Sure, the remake has its own unique design elements that are noteworthy, which I talked about in the previous video, but the remake is also so conventional. It looks and feels just like every other over-the-shoulder horror game of the past 10 years. The original Silent Hill 2 stood out among its peers and cast a long shadow over horror gaming for over 20 years and counting. The remake just kind of blends in with its peers. It's just another good or great remake or reboot in a long, ever-growing line of remakes and reboots. Thanks for watching.